Welcome to the Freeman Air and Space Institute's webinar today on regulation and advancement, the Military Aviation Authority's role in Defence's uncrewed ambitions. I'm Sophie Antrobus. I'm a Senior Research Fellow and Co-Director at the Freeman Air Institute, and I'm so delighted to be hosting this webinar. We're going to explore how the Military Aviation Authority, the MAA, have shaped the regulatory framework for uncrewed air systems. We'll be calling them drones as well. We might discuss that term, I don't know, across defence. I come at this from having written a paper about risk appetite in the Royal Air Force and the military or aviation area more widely, and about how the Nimrod review, which followed the crash of the Nimrod aircraft in 2006, partly created, was there and created the Military Aviation Authority. And I've got interested in how the MAA operated. I've had a really fascinating time working with the MAA last year. I was preparing a paper on the Protector MQ-9 aircraft. We might come on to that. And I'm really interested to introduce them to our audience to discuss how things have changed, how much things have been changing, and the real challenge of the amount of drone activity. And we'll discuss probably, obviously, that's related to the Russia-Ukraine warfare. Enough about me. I'd like to introduce our participants briefly, and then they're going to speak for a short period, and then we're going to take lots of questions. Can I just remind people to use the Q&A, not the chat function, for questions, and I'll try and get to as many as possible. First off, I'm going to be calling on Air Vice Marshal Peter Squires, who is the Director of the Military Aviation Authority and has been so since April 2025. So he's nearly a year in post now. I declare an interest in that we've known each other. I was in the Royal Air Force with him as well, and it's great to have him on board. He's got an illustrious career across various responsibilities. He was a Harrier pilot, and obviously he doesn't tell people that. He was Commandant RAF Cranwell, which was a really important role, and his last posting was as Commander British Forces Cyprus. So he's had a really interesting and varied background coming to the MAA. We've also got Captain Joe Dransfield with us. He joined the MAA in March 2024, so been there quite a while, taking responsibility for the team that provides regulatory assurance for the UK Defence's fixed-wing, rotary and parachuting activity. And he's had specific responsibility for drones, particularly uncrewed air systems under 25 kilos. And he'll give us, I would say, compared to Pete's strategic view, he'll give us more of the operational view of what it's like in the MAA day to day with all the challenges that until recently he's been handling. His background was as a 15 years as a Royal Navy Lynx helicopter observer. And I should mention, since I'm an academic, he's also served as a military professor at the US Naval College. And last but definitely not least, Commander Tony Sherwin, thank you for joining us. He's a very busy person at the moment as commander of 744 Naval Air Squadron. He's also got a Royal Navy observer background, and this was my ship, HMS Invincible, when I was a young junior officer, so I'm happy with my Navy colleagues here. He served initially on search and rescue and then converted to the Merlin helicopter and has various roles there, both on operations and in test and evaluation. 744 NAS is now part of the UK's Air and Space Warfare Centre, and it's trialling drones across the three services. So he's going to really be able to talk to us at the tactical level. I'm going to hand over to them in turn, and I'm going to shut up and wait until we're ready for questions. So Pete, first of all, as Director of MAA, handing over to you, your take on our subject. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, and good morning, everyone. And my thanks to the Freeman Institute for hosting this discussion on uncrewed flying regulation, because it is most timely. So our aim today is simple. It's to explain to you how the Military Aviation Authority, or MAA, enables uncrewed air capability, and how we balance our mandate to protect our people and the public from harm, whilst enabling operational capability to reach the warfighter at pace and at minimal cost. And I'll be clear from the outset, regulation done right is a force multiplier, not a brake. It's the way that we create the lawful, safe and credible freedoms that defence needs to move at the pace of the threat. Now, this matters more than ever. The war in Ukraine has made uncrewed systems central to modern combat, compressing adaptation cycles and raising expectations about rapid introduction and fielding. Our response is centred on achieving speed with safety. We must regulate for the pace of the threat, not for peacetime comfort. Now, this aligns perfectly with the cross-government push for simpler, faster regulation described in the number 10 Regulatory Action Plan. Now, on the so-called administrative burden, because the MAA does not charge for approvals, value appears as programme-level time and cost avoidance. Our recognition of national regulators and our use of equivalent airworthiness standards are the manifestation of this. We are pushing a do once, use many maxim that not only avoids duplication, reduces cost and shortens time of flight to the warfighter, it also strengthens allied and partner interoperability. Now, let me anchor this conversation with why defence regulation must be different to civil regimes. In the civilian world, risk to life is typically carried by the operator or industry. Operating approvals are focused primarily on compliance from declarative evidence. In defence, risk to life is owned by the Crown. That fact changes our assurance problem entirely. It's why defence uses derogations, exemptions, and disapplications of legislation, not to lower standards, but to create the controlled freedoms commanders need to train, test, and operate, often in high-risk scenarios within a known safety envelope. Hence, our regulatory regime is outcome-focused, prioritises safety results and lawful freedom to operate, and does not seek compliance for its own sake. I would describe it as controlled flexibility that enables activity, not slows it. So for uncrewed systems, what has changed in recent years? Well, demand. It has absolutely skyrocketed. In response, we've expanded the MAA's uncrewed air team, strengthened the MAA-delivered uncrew responsible officers course to our hundreds of users, and streamlined submissions so approvals meet defence tempo while maintaining proportionate assurance. We're working closely with our civil and military regulator counterparts to develop our uncrewed regulations. We align where it makes sense to maximise coherence and reduce regulatory burden for companies that operate uncrewed air systems on both civil and military registers. And we seek to support a practical revolving door operating model that lets those firms move safely and efficiently between regimes. In test and evaluation, regulatory sandboxes endorsed by the Strategic Defence Review for Maritime Operations already exist in the air domain. With our new pre-approved uncrewed air test clearance for smaller uncrewed activity, giving competent organisations even more freedoms to iterate quickly. On the one-way effector, so-called grey space, our principle is use case first, definition second. We set the route at project initiation with the MAA, the Defence Ordnance, Munitions and Explosives Safety Regulator, and the wider defence enterprise at the same table. That gives programmes one clear, fast path through the system. And the principle that underpins everything we do is that regulatory freedom is proportional to organisational maturity and competence. So to companies, I say, engage us early, invest in expertise, set the right air safety culture across your enterprise, and focus on evidence to support arguments, not assertions. So in closing, I offer this. Defence regulation is sometimes mischaracterised as a brake, but the evidence says otherwise. The truth is that it is the legal and moral architecture that gives UK defence the essential freedoms to protect the nation against a rapidly evolving threat. Nowhere is this clearer than in the uncrewed arena, that is moving at serious pace, where the MAA, working with industry partners, is proving itself a genuine force multiplier, getting capability to the front line rapidly and at minimal cost, all within a proportionate safety wrapper. That is the partnership the front line needs and deserves. I will now hand to Captain Joe Dransfield to give you an operational view. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. And thanks to Sophie and the Institute for the opportunity to share our perspective. As Sophie mentioned, I've spent the last 2 years with the combined pleasure and challenge of holding the responsibility for the approval of uncrewed systems under 25 kilos. I've also had an advisory role in the bigger systems, although the signature of those based on the higher risk is up the food chain with the director. What I'd like to do now is build on the director's high-level view and just give a little bit more on the what and how that the team are actually supporting Defence's ambitions. I guess up front, I would like to say that we've had uncrewed regulations for almost 10 years now in various forms. They've evolved along the way, and they've particularly evolved at pace recently as the profile's grown, as the situation's grown. We've adopted a framework that's very similar to the CAA's that categorises uncrewed systems by the level of risk to life. And I should again just put the caveat there that we are always focused here on risk to third parties. There's clearly no first party risk. There's no aircrew, no passengers. And we deal with second party risk to those involved persons directly through the operator. So we're really interested in risk to the uninvolved persons, whether that be mod employees or actually at the larger scale out to the general public. Just for a sort of a comparative frame, the traditional MAA model for crewed aircraft considers if they are first safe to operate through certification and then operated safely in a safe operating environment through assurance, which has been my world. For uncrewed systems under 25 kilos, we focus entirely on that assurance element, as forcing in high engineering standards and design safety targets that were previously predicated on protecting aircrew would be just disproportionate. We're always aiming to take the best bits of what is a mature defence aviation risk model, clear identification, mitigation and accountability, and apply that at a level that is proportionate to the risk from these platforms. As ever across that model, we don't own any of the risk. We set the framework for accountable individuals to own the risk. And we use there the as low as reasonably practical and tolerable model, a LARP, that is pretty mature across defence. So the real starting point for a unit that wants to operate uncrewed systems is a categorisation request that considers the type, weight and performance of the uncrewed system they wish to operate. We also ask them to contribute to us their experience, what's the operating model and the concept of operations they'll use, and what is the assurance regime that will support that. They then fill in a pretty standard submission. They'll often be advised by the MAA uncrewed team, especially if there's something funky or novel in there. And then the team will review it for a decision. It was over the last 2 years myself, and it'll now be the good Captain Matt Devin who's in the chair. That decision and the signature that comes at the end of it is primarily predicated on risk proportionality, making sure that the risk wrapper that sits around it is appropriate and that the unit has really done enough thinking about what could go wrong and how they manage that. For reference, there are about 160 units that currently hold letters of endorsed categorisation, with 40 of them joining the scheme in the last year. The vast majority of those are British Army units, and that scales from kind of the divisional level right down to some specific tactical units. Across those 160 units, Defence is operating almost 130 different types of drones that range from the handheld palm of your hand up to several tons. And I'm sure some of you saw, for instance, coverage of Leonardo's Proteus that looks like a helicopter uncrewed flying down at Bredannock last week, right at the top of that space. Reflecting on my 2 years, I'd say that the volume of business has been significant and has grown, but it's been manageable. As well as those initial applications, we've also considered about 140 amendments to categorisations in the last 6 months, and that's for units who are changing, adding platforms, changing operating environments, or making significant changes. To echo what the boss said, units that invest in expertise and supervision are in a position to be granted greater freedoms, and Commander Tony, who you'll hear from shortly, and his team at 744 are a great example. So overall, I would say that Defence is very much on a journey, and we have in that been doing some collective discovery learning alongside the regulated community, but we have found routes to grant permissions for almost all of their ambitions. We've offered extended range beyond visual line of sight operations, in some instances out now to hundreds of kilometres. We've enabled swarming operations, armed uncrewed operations, mothership drone drops, drone-on-drone intercepts, GPS off operations, and a really cool and exciting range of crewed-uncrewed integration, whether that's FPV drones being launched from helicopters or backseat rotary crews controlling and coordinating multiple USs. I know that Tony's going to give some more details on those shortly. To get to that success, and the boss has hit it already, good early engagement with the regulator and investing in and developing the right experience is essential. Especially as you move up the complexity scale, as I've described, being able to ask the right questions, understand risk ownership are essential, and to have the SQEP, as we talk about, suitably qualified and experienced personnel to do that is a must. Being candid, as I hope I can be in this audience here, we have seen quite a bit of friction, usually from those who are less air aware and don't understand the nature, spirit and intent of the regulations. But we've definitely pushed through that, and the customer base, I would say, has grown more intelligent by the day. We do occasionally still see some slightly naive overconfidence in systems. Examples would be putting absolute faith in uncertified geofencing or return to home functions, whereas we look at what could go wrong and what you're going to do if and when things do go wrong. We aim to update the regulations every few months, and that is now supported by great engagement and feedback from the growing community. But I will say, and there is sometimes lag in the regulations because stuff is moving really quickly, even when the regulations don't fit, we've put in place sufficiently flexible, risk-balanced approaches to sport activity. And we work closely with the CAA on this to make sure that we understand each other's regulatory envelopes. As an example, the next iteration of the regulations, which is going through final review at the moment, will support greater testing, make it easier to manufacture and use your own systems, including 3D printing and repair of systems. To support all of that, and the boss has alluded to it, our capacity and capability has grown as the demand have grown. And while we have faced a degree of grumbling in places, the truth is that units have invested in their people, engaged closely, have made hay and pushed forward with loads of cool stuff that is now getting to the front line. I should also note our responsiveness in that. Our brochure standard is 20 days to turn around an application, but we have done it in hours. I would reflect on one particular Friday afternoon request from Operation Interflex, where we trained the Ukrainian army in the UK, that we managed to spin around in a couple of hours. And I'd also look at another example where a British army were conducting a trial of a one-way effector in Kenya. The risk framework for that, the agreement was at threat, and we stepped in to put it under an MAA risk envelope at 2 days' notice, enabling that activity to go ahead. So we can be flexible, we can be agile, and we can get it done. It's been a pretty fascinating journey. I've loved it, and I'm really proud of the work that we've done to get the capability through, whilst protecting our mandate from the Secretary of State to protect our people. I do, at the end of my time as a regulator, like to remind people that although we are there, and sometimes I think to people can feel like the enemy, we were all on the other side of the fence. Sophie described our careers. We've all lived on the other side, and so really we do want to get the kit into the hands of the boys and girls on the front line. And proportionate regulation is what turns that experimentation and development into credible, scalable military capability without doing the enemy's job for them. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Commander Tony Sherwin, Commanding Officer of 744 Naval Air Squadron, who's going to add a bit of colour and reality to what's going on at the front line. So, Tony, over to you, please.
Sir, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you to Dr. Sophie and the Institute for inviting me onto the panel and allowing me an opportunity to give the lived experience of the good, the bad, and maybe the ugly of the US regulations from the MAA. And noting that the directors on the call, I'm hoping I'll still have a career at the end of this meeting, all being well. Starting with what 744 Squadron is, so to avoid any confusion, 744 Squadron and the Joint UAS Test and Evaluation Squadron are the same thing. So 744 is our badge. We've got a rich heritage of conducting aircraft trials dating back 80 years, and the Joint UAS Test and Evaluation Squadron is our functional title. I should also add that although we're a Naval Air Squadron and I'm a Naval Officer, we sit under the Air Force, and as Dr. said in the introduction, we are one of 7 T&E squadrons within the Air and Space Warfare Centre. We're a fully tri-service unit, so we've got aircrew and engineers from Army, Navy and Air Force with a really broad range of backgrounds, and we've got embedded analysts and kinetic trials officers to support us in our work. We also sit as part of DroneWorks, which is part of the Air Test and Evaluation Centre, the ATEC, which is a partnership between the Warfare Centre and Kinetic under the long-term partnership agreement at Boscombe Down, where we are based. I've been in command of the squadron for 3 years, and in that time we've conducted over 30 trials, including first flight on the military register over a number of new drones and several other firsts for defence. So going into some examples of what we've done and been enabled by the MAA regulations. If we start small and work up, as Captain Joe said, we dispatch first-person view drones from rotary wing platforms as part of Trial Hornet's Nest. And very shortly, every helicopter in the UK inventory should have a clearance to dispatch and control FPVs. Having worked in T&E for over 10 years now, I can say that trials to drop things from crewed platforms tend to take a number of years to progress. But in this instance, with the support of the MAA, DNS, JEC, and the aviation duty holders, we managed to turn around the initial capability for Chinook within 6 months from concept to in-service capability. There were various regulatory challenges to overcome here, but for us, the MAA, because we engaged early, we're in the room from the start, literally came down for a big kick-off meeting at Boscombe Down, and they worked with us to develop a special purpose clearance to allow the trial to go ahead. And I know 6 months might still seem slow, and for people, to see what's going on in Ukraine with their risk appetite, it's probably slower than them, but it's much faster than we've done in the past. So I generally think we are moving in the right direction. Also, as AVM Squires has mentioned, one of the biggest growth areas for us as a squadron is one-way effectors. It's a really broad term, and it means lots of different things to different people. With modern tech and the advance of low-cost autopilots, there is a very blurred line between a one-way attack drone and an entry-level cruise missile. My experience, both the initial testing of these systems is usually focused on launching it, reliability, and the ability to accurately hit a target. None of this really requires it to have an explosive payload to be fitted, and for this reason, often early on, they don't need to be regulated as weapons. And for this reason, Defence has chosen to test a number of these initially as drones under the MAA regulations as the most efficient and convenient way to test them quickly with well-defined procedures and risk holding chains. With 744 as a squadron has tested first flight of at least 5 one-way effectors, I can recall, ranging from 10 kilograms up to almost a ton, all of which in the UK. And although these systems were initially tested as drones, in service it's highly likely that they won't be drones, they'll be weapons and regulated as such. And it might be the case that the only time they're ever regulated by the MAA is during the T&E phase. Some people have been quite vocal in asking for clearer definitions of what a one-way effector is, but actually I'm pretty comfortable that the grey space between the regulators gives us some freedom of manoeuvre to pick the most appropriate regulated pathway for the use case in hand. And as the AVM said at the start, if we agree that early and everyone knows what that pathway is, it makes things a lot easier. And it might well be a case that we have a zigzag path between regulatory pathways, and in the morning we fly a system as a drone for T&E, and that same system in the afternoon might be fired as a weapon under a different use case. And that's fine, and I don't think we should have a problem with that. I'd say the one caveat is that when you're trying to make aviation regulations fit something that looks and smells like a missile, it's not always easy and as neat as you might like. For example, the MA regulations say that when you lose an aircraft, understandably, you have to raise a serious occurrence notification, the SON. Clearly, this doesn't make sense. If you're designed a drone to fly into a target and not come back, there's not much point making a big song and dance about losing it because you never expected it to come back. We've had some feedback from stakeholders who can get frustrated when we choose to apply MAA regulations to one-way effectors. And the analogy that I quite often like to use, it's like you go and buy a boat and then you want to get some safety checks. So you decide to take it for an MOT because that's how we check things for safety for cars. But then you get frustrated with the MOT station because it fails the MOT because your boat hasn't got any wheels. The regulations aren't so designed for weapons, but if you choose to employ them for drones, don't get angry if they don't work as you expect. And if you don't like the answer, find somebody who tests boats is normally the message I give. One of the other challenges we've had testing one-way effectors is geography. We simply don't have the space in the UK that you might find in the US or Australia, and most of our large air ranges are over the sea. which is great sometimes, but not when you want to hit land targets or test terrain mapping navigation systems. This doesn't mean that we can't test in the UK, and with the support of the MAA, Kinetic, DNS, we're currently testing some pretty high-end systems under Project Breakstop, which is in the open media, and this was achieved within 12 months of program launch, and a good example of using the SORA specific operation risk assessment methodology to really focus efforts on the key mitigations to manage the risk. These trials aren't easy, and the effort to ensure the risk is understood, articulated, and then held at the right level is considerable, but entirely achievable within the current regulations. The MAA set up the framework for the risk needs to be managed, but it's really up to the organisation conducting the test to design that test, articulate the risk, and ultimately for the duty holders to own it rather than the MAA. My final thought, as I think I have run on slightly, is on sandboxes, and as already been mentioned, we're working with the MAA with our sandbox and the PUC concept, which should be released later this year. So last year we approached the MAA to request an open an S1 UAS sandbox based on our internal processes for airworthiness and flying operations. And they worked with us to develop that sandbox that we got issued last year, and we've used it several times now to allow us to react to the pace of demand of MOD customers to quickly test drones within our trusted sandbox, rather than having to go back to the MAA every time for future approvals. A good example of this is flying Storm Shroud with a Sierra AR3 in support of 216 Squadron under the RAF Autonomous Collaborative Platforms Programme. That's me. Thank you for your time, and I very much look forward to your questions.
Tony, thank you so much. The first thing I'm going to say is it's lovely that we're getting quite a lot of questions. Before we started, I did brief, and our speakers have followed my guidance of not using too many acronyms. In your questions, there are a lot of acronyms, some of which I don't know. If you're going to put in future questions, I'd be grateful if you spelt things out. That would be helpful. I also note that Air Vice Marshal Squires has been answering some questions. Thank you for that. I'm actually going to go to a question that you have answered, Pete, but I also just want to expand out or maybe just explore, because there was the question from Andrew Hawkes about the MAA lessons learned out of the experiences of large unmanned capabilities being brought into service like Protector. And I just wanted to touch on or ask you to explore how your relationships with the CAA in particular have developed over time. And I wonder if I know you've put a little answer in there, but I think it's important to understand that your organizations have worked together. I think I would understand a bit more closely in the last few years than you had done before, perhaps. I don't know whether Joe or Pete, you want to just speak to that.
Okay, well, I'll start. Perhaps Joe, who's been a bit longer, will probably add more detail to it. So we have a number of working groups with the CA across a whole range of areas. Uncrewed obviously is one of them, but is one that is, as you can understand and appreciate, probably the most active at the moment, and probably has been for a while. And Protector has been a fascinating conversation, and as I've put in the chat, it's been going for a number of years, and we've applied a significant amount of time and effort into Protector as the whole of defence, and we've learned a great deal. It's at the vanguard of a system that is the first of class, first of breed, that has been fully certified. So there's a lot that obviously is done and been learnt from it, and we are triaging all the lessons, not just us, but across defence, of what we can get from Protector, and undoubtedly we will share that with whomsoever is bringing similar systems in. In terms of the CA, that's the biggest conversation, not just the CA, but also with the National Air Traffic Service, has been about airspace, because you're putting this system in both UK airspace and European and global airspace with normal civilian traffic. So they rightly want to be assured that this thing is capable and confident of doing that. And that has been the main focus of the CA. And we've had some very extensive working groups where we work with them, with NATS, to ensure that they have the right evidence that they can then approve this to work in normal separation procedures. And that has been incredibly pretty good process that's gone very quickly. So really pleased with how we've integrated that. I think we've all learnt from doing that as well. And I think the next time the next one comes along, it'll be even easier. So that's what I will offer at this stage. Joe, you may want to embellish on that one, please.
I think I can offer a relatively brief embellishment, sir, because it is it's a very positive relationship. We are in absolutely regular comms in the UAS space with the team there, and actually not just the UAS team at the CAA, but there's a test and evaluation team who we work closely with in this space. We meet face to face. We have been exploring for a while, embedding members in each other's teams. That's a live conversation at the moment, because I think that the demand is only going to get larger. One thing that we haven't sort of touched on there that I think is worth saying is that there's a significant chunk of our current activity, because of the way that we operate, that happens in segregated airspace, in ranges away from everything else, and that takes one element of risk out, and we then very much focus on the containment argument within there. But very much, beyond defence, for the future air environment, the UK collectively across MOD, across DFT, is going to have to work out how we set these things free in the wild increasingly. So there's a whole strand of activity that we're working on there. The future of airspace, DFT led, but with MOD and including the MAA dialed into that. So we are well joined. The conversation is progressing, but there's going to be a lot to do together.
Thanks for that. I'm going to come to a question I think is quite interesting from, they're all very interesting, but Ajay Moda has asked, does the MAA treat the regulation of drones or UAS as a system, i.e. review the command control system as part of the safe operation of the vehicle? I hadn't really thought about that as a question, so I just wanted where you see that.
Yeah, absolutely, Sophie. That's it is a great question, and it's something that we've done. You talked about the terminology. We originally referred to these things as RPAS, remotely piloted air systems, but we have very much gone to uncrewed, because that encompasses all of it. Certainly, we spent a lot of time in Protector looking at the ground station element. Satellite link connections, another fascinating element of it. So we are very much looking at end to end. So for us, effectively, anything that can drive air safety risk into it at any point in the system is absolutely considered, whether that's handset, whether that's the software in the handset, right up to the air vehicle itself. So we do very much look at that term uncrewed air system. The system is very much air vehicle plus everything else that goes around it.
Thanks for that. I actually want to come, so we've got a question for Tony that's just come in from Aisha McClement. Are crewed and uncrewed air systems being integrated in the sandbox? If so, is this being achieved safely? I'm sure it is, but go on, Tony.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. And yeah, good question, Aisha. At the moment, our sandbox is limited to uncrewed only. So for the time we've done crewed, uncrewed teaming, we've had to go back to the MAA for an additional clearance. Because of the additional risk that carries. So when you want to operate a drone and a crewed aircraft in the same space, that is going to increase in risk. So the few times we've done it, we've gone back to the MAA and we've had a separate special purpose clearance that sits on top of our sandbox, which has allowed us to do the crewed uncrewed teaming.
Just to come in from the, I think again that almost relates to the last point that I made about putting crewed and uncrewed alongside each other, and again a lot of work going on around sort of technological solutions, so electronic conspicuity, and the various elements there, air traffic control. The bit that we'd always come back to there, which is almost sort of first principles for us in the MAA, is what is the risk? What have we done to mitigate that risk, and who owns that risk? So when Tony wants to put an FPV in close proximity to a CH-47 Chinook, actually it's largely the Chinook risk chain that we're most interested in there. So it's about us going up the duty holder chain for Chinook, identifying the risks, the fact that we've got Tony and his team, the experts in there, we've modelled what's going to happen, we've identified the risk, and to be able to say to the Chinook duty holder, are you happy with the risk? And if they are, and it's owned, then that very much fits our model. and that's really what allows us to do some of the very much more high-end stuff that we do across the piece. Is, we can do high tariff, high risk stuff. We've just got to make sure that the risk is identified and appropriately owned.
Thanks. I'm going to come to a question from Julian Brazier. He says it's encouraging to hear that 160 units have had applications accepted. How many of those are reserve units? I don't know if you have this information. And does the SQEP evaluation process take full account of civilian experience and track record?
So I'm going to ask to take a moment and come back to you, Sir Julian, if I may, in terms of reserve numbers. I don't have that on my fingers. We have plenty of reserve numbers, and I know that I've certainly seen discussions with the Honourable Artillery Company and units of that ilk recently. So it is there, and I think it will grow. In terms of the SQEP from civilian background, absolutely. I think we are. We are particularly in the drone space blessed with great flexibility in there. If we were looking at that in the crewed world, we would call that an alternative acceptable means of compliance, an AAMC. But I think as we look at that down the scale, we're very much looking for people to make a case and provide evidence. And if they've got hundreds and thousands of hours elsewhere, for us to ask them, or not trust them based on that would not be proportionate. So we do absolutely have flexibility in that space, and I'm going to try and speak to the team in the background, if I may, and see if I can come up with an answer on reserve units. But I know that there are plenty in place. Tony, do you want to come in?
Tony.
Yeah, if I can, yeah. I mean, we're not a reservist unit, but on the reservist front, we do have a number of reservists embedded within my squadron. We've got an army or an officer and an RAF flight sergeant who routinely come operate with us. We've got a really good history in service, but now in their civilian roles, operating drones, and we absolutely recognise their civilian experience and skills to bring to the relief party. And 216 Squadron, who we work very closely with, have got a number of reservists there. They draw from industry and are looking to grow that to build the strength of 216 Squadron.
Thank you. I'm going to ask two questions now that kind of big picture, and there might be very short answers or longer, and it might start at the strategic level. One's from Simon Patterson, which is, how much work have we done with NATO to harmonise approach given the likelihood of working alongside NATO allies? And secondly, from, excuse my pronunciation, Branko Rusic, which single capability gap in the uncrewed portfolio would you fix first? Platform numbers, operator currency, sustainment, or spectrum ECA resilience, and why? That's clearly not really a question for the MAA specifically, because it's not your job really, but if you've got any views on that, I'd be interested. Can I start with you, Pete, on the NATO side of things?
Yeah, sure, of course. So I would say we're very closely integrated in a number of the NATO forums. For example, next month or the end of this month, there's the NATO uncrewed working group that we attend as well. And the conversations we're having today are exactly the same as that NATO will be having about the regulatory pathways to use the proportionality and how we apply that. And those are the forums where we inject our thinking, we listen to the thinking that's going on, because I think the point about interoperability is at a regulatory level as well. So our recognition that we recognise other national regulators. And from that, the companies and our certification regimes are able to use the evidence to cross-pollinate. So ultimately, the more similar we can make our regulatory pathways, the easier it is to recognise each other. And for companies ultimately who are operating in a global market, for them to take the evidence from one and apply it to the other. So from that side of NATO, it's both how we develop our regs and the NATO STANAGs, the standards that they have as well. For example, the JARUS from the ICAO JARUS, that is the joint regulation that we're trying to use, again, is spread across the NATO. So I would say high in terms of our commonality with them and high in terms of our engagement. There may be more perhaps that Joe has there.
just looping back, if I may, to Sir Julian's question. We think it's about 30 of the overall units that are reserve units. So there are a good chunk in there, although clearly a lot more. And as someone who might find themselves in a reserve uniform operating drones not too far from now, I think it's an exciting move. I think I'm in terms of the NATO harmonisation, I think we are close up with that, and there's almost as ever with this, there are two levels to this. There's a sort of a regulatory alignment piece, which we, the MAA, own, and then there's a defence capability alignment piece, which is very much more centre owned. But I think we're in a good place for that, right down from the small quadcopter stuff, right up to Protector, and there's been some good working groups up at that level. In terms of Branko's question about the challenges, and what a great question. We sit in a really fascinating place, actually. I think we are one of the few entities that touches everything in defence that flies uncrewed. So we do have a really good view over there, but we don't get a capability vote. We don't own any of that. That is a defence view, and as I'm sure many on the call are tracking closely, we're all waiting with interest and bated breath for the Defence Investment Plan, which will come soon, which will hopefully give us the clarity of where defence is going to put its focus, its priority, and its resources. And out of that we'll see. But there is a challenge to balance there across all those elements that you've identified there, Branko. So I think we are getting to a strategic point. That also gives me the opportunity to mention a new organisation, the USC, the Uncrewed Systems Centre, which is being stood up by Defence, going to be based in Swindon, going to start with uncrewed air systems, but build out from there. And they are going to be the central entity to answer all those capability questions. MAA have been involved in the formation of that from the beginning, so that the regulatory pathway is baked into that. So I think in questions of defence, of capability, of regulation, defence is moving forward at pace and trying to pull that together with a recognition that a lot of the work that's done so far has perhaps not been as coherent as it could, but the pathway that we're on, I think, looks really positive. Tony, send.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm just going to go back to the NATO question. So as a teeny squadron, we've got some fairly good links with some NATO countries, some more than others. We regularly send people to the annual NATO UES working groups. We're doing some good stuff with Sweden on some similar platforms. Next week, I'm chairing a Five Eye Maritime UES working group where we get together and talk about what we're doing in the UES space. And Canada increasingly is looking like a key partner to do some collaboration, particularly with potentially taking stuff to the British Army training unit, Suffield, a big army training area in Canada that has the potential for doing uncrewed T&E in the future. So we're working very closely with Kings at the moment in aligning our processes, which is quite reassuring that they're already very, very similar. So some good collaboration there.
Thanks, Tony. And thank you, Joe, because you kind of answered the question about USC as well, which was helpful. I wanted to come on to Mike Doyle, Fraser Nash Consultancy. He said you explained current guidance for one way effective projects is to hold project initiation meetings each time with representatives from the MAA and DOSR to agree the current regulatory pathway. This obviously places a large time commitment on these regulators to support these meetings. Also seems to be limited to defined defence projects. How should OEMs doing their own product development and self-funded R&D approach the problem? And has the DSA got the resource to scale the support for this demand? Big question. Don't know if you have an answer.
I'll come in. I used to live next door to Mike, so once upon a time. Hi, Mike. Great to hear from you, and a great question. And I think that you are close to probably one of our biggest challenges in recent times. I'm going to come back with a headline answer of it depends. So in that family that Tony described a little bit earlier of one-way effectors, if we're talking about a platform that has previously had a life as an uncrewed system and is being modified, I think we've got that pathway pretty well squared. That sits neatly with the MAA, with input from the Defence Ordnance Safety Regulator around the energetics and explosives elements of it. For companies that are building something from scratch, I think that again the USC is going to be crucial in that, because they are going to be the front door. One of the questions that we've often been challenged with is how do we without a defence sponsor or without a defence lead develop and drive forward with this defence, and almost sort of parochially and selfishly, the answer from the MAA is, well, we don't pick those capabilities. We don't nominate sponsors. That's for Defence and D&S to nominate that, and when they do, they come to us. So ahead of that now, the Uncrewed Systems Centre is really going to be the gateway for that. Good linkages with the MAA, good linkages with the CAA, and I think as ever, it's really then about choosing the most sensible, well-fitting and proportionate regulatory pathway. So I think, to your point on sort of kick-off meetings and early engagements, I think, Mike, that's going to stay a really necessary part of this. I don't think the route is clear enough yet that it's just a case of, hey, consult the regs and go and get on with this. I know that there are plans to make MOD ranges more available for civilian applications, and again, USC is very much at the head of that. So I think good movement in that direction. Watch this space. Early engagement, discussion, and kick-off meetings are going to remain pretty important for a while. Tony, anything you want to add to that? Because again, you see a good chunk of that coming across your desk.
Yeah, I guess I'd say if it's OEM internal funded R&D, why are you initially trying to come to the regulators? I would say, from my experience, the more of that internal R&D that you've done under CAA, and I know that can be a challenge because if it looks military, sometimes the CAA say no. But if you can, I would try and do that as much as you can outside of that, and come to the MAA once it's a funded program, bring it in, because you're trying to do that. I guess before you've got that is a challenge without the bit the captain kind of Joe mentioned about a DNS sponsor and who's going to endorse that through. I know that's probably not the answer you're looking for, Mike, but yeah, the best progress we've seen, I think, is where companies, even small companies, have done as much testing as possible on the CA regs. So by the time it comes to military for testing and in service, there is an evidence base there and more to work on than at the R&D stage.
Thanks, Tony. I'm going to do maybe a bit unusual. I don't normally do this in webinars. I've got a question from Mike Howard, which I'm going to put initially to Pete. But for both Joe and Tony, if you could just have a look at the questions, because you're more expert than I am. If there's anything you particularly want to address, I'm just going to give you the chance to have a quick 2-minute spurt after Pete about anything that you think you should tackle. But first, Pete, Mike Harwood, well known to both of us from our days at Staff College, has asked, when PJHQ, or now I'm doing acronyms, Permanent Joint Headquarters, was set up in the mid-90s, we were visited to death by other nations, eager to see how the system could actually work. Is it the same for the MAA, especially now you've done so much UAS work? And I think that's an interesting question, because clearly when I started talking to you about the MAA nearly a year ago, you were very open in inviting me to come and meet the team. And I assume you're getting more and more people interested in your work. And how does it feel? Do you feel like you're sort of in a tsunami of people wanting to come and learn from you, or is there more to do in that area?
Okay, good question. Morning, Mike. I mean, you talked about the oomph of Ukraine. There is no doubt Ukraine has provided oomph across the piece, not just in drones or uncrewed. I mean, clearly that is the main focus, but not just. And as we talked about, the USC is going to provide very much, that coherence that across the system that's needed. From a regulator perspective, we have a far bigger regulated community, a lot of users now who either are on our books, as it were, or want to get on our books. And for me, a lot of it, as you will have discovered, is that learning and that education piece to understand who we are and what we do, and also what we don't provide to people. So we're doing a lot of engagement this year. This year is going to be, I would say, a year of engagement. I was just talking yesterday to the DG Air Marshal Al Gillespie about the importance of engagement, because there's lots of well-intentioned people out there who want to do better for defence, and we are absolutely in that same space. We want to do better defence to get capability there as fast as possible. And I think a lot of them, with that well-intentioned bit, they don't quite understand enough to know where we fit in that part and that piece of the puzzle. So the more I can get out there and explain it, not only to companies, to users, and to others interested parties in the UK, but then to share that globally, particularly across NATO allies and other partners, is really important. So, I mean, I'm out to Germany coming up soon to talk to them. We've got teams who go out to the US working group with NATO, the Five Eyes community, and at multiple different layers and levels. That is a constant that we do, because I think everyone, the more people who understand the enterprise, who understand how to navigate it, and perhaps importantly, the positive changes that are going on, then the easier it'll be to navigate them. And I would say the answer at the moment is very much definitely we're trying to engage, to educate, and to influence to make certain that it is as interoperable as it can be. I'll pause there. Thank you.
Thanks, great. So Joe and Tony, I don't mind in which order. Tony, why not right over to you? And if you just want to take a couple of minutes to tackle anything particular in the Q&A that you think you can.
Yeah, thanks, Sophie. There's a couple of questions in there about, I think, synthetic testing, and if we can't test in the UK, can we test it in a lab or modelling? I'd say yes, there's definitely a place for that. I think most of the things we've tested, the manufacturer has done certainly some modelling and synthetic testing. However, by the time it comes to us, there is a certain amount of real world testing that you just do have to test. We test a lot of first flight platforms to prove that the engine works, that, it takes off, the launcher works, it integrates. So a lot of things we've done, I don't think you could really test synthetically. I think the big opportunity that we are getting to, hopefully later this year, is autonomy. I think autonomous synthetic testing is going to be the way ahead. So when various companies come with their different autonomy stacks, they want testing it, we should do the majority of that in some kind of autonomy forge in a lab, and then a small subset of that comes to live test. And I've got some aspirations to have a fleet of aircraft to test autonomous things when they're having to test it synthetically, to do the final testing, probably in a live synthetic blend. So a number of test beds flying, say 10 in a swarm in the UK, and then another 90 of those in a synthetic environment, all thinking they're in the same swarm. So I think that's the game changer for the synthetic world.
So I think I'm gonna try and grab a bit of a theme that will hopefully knock off a few questions, Sophie, if I may. And I think that's probably technology. There's certainly a question on AI, one on detect and avoid, and one on swarming. As the questions allude to, this stuff is moving incredibly quickly, and we're working hard. We do have a futures team in the MAA who track this stuff. We work closely with industry to get to it. I guess if I come to AI first, that's a big question. I mean, it's a big question for everyone in every bit of their life at the moment, let alone in aviation regulations. For us in the regulatory world, we do have regulatory guidance on AI. At this point in time, we're really happy with AI in systems. The bit that we haven't got to yet is safety critical systems, and that will come pretty well downstream. And I think the reason for that is because of the nature of AI and the underlying technology. You can't traditionally we brought that risk out through certification. Lots of people look at the ones and zeros to absolutely ensure that it'll do what it'll do. That is just not possible in AI world. So in AI world, we're going to have to treat AI as much more like humans. And Tony's got 3 stripes on his shoulder, and he's got his observer's wings on there. We're going to have to build confidence and evidence, and it's going to be an assurance-like approach to AI that we're going to have to take. So we're going to have to build that up, and we've accepted that. At the moment, the way that we are dealing with it, as ever, is putting sensible risk mitigation in place. So if you want to go and fly a platform with AI in, which we have done in the uncrewed space, the best way to do that is a really solid containment argument. It's not going to leave the airspace, and to have an assured flight termination system. So if it does try to leave the airspace, you push the button and it cuts it down. Because that, for us as a regulator, means that we are absolutely assured that the crazy funky trial with AI that you're doing is not going to end up crashing into the schoolyard 10 miles away. And that's the bottom line for us. And I will say, I'm always careful that when everyone's telling us we've got to go faster, if we go too fast and get this wrong, we will screw things up for everyone across defence, across anyone who wants to fly drones anywhere. So there's a healthy balance and tension there. So that's how we're managing AI there, and we'll grow forward with that. But we've got a strategy to look at that. Detect and avoid, we're really alive to. Stu, thank you for your question. In terms of that sort of open airspace in the UK, that's very much CAA, Department for Trade lead. In terms of putting aircraft together in the airspace, we're really happy to do that now. Again, if there's a solid risk argument and the crewed platform duty holder is going to do it across all those various different modes of detect and avoid, and we're seeing some clever stuff coming now in terms of some of the sort of elements of visual system adding onto there. It's very much the same debate as self-driving cars at some levels, and for us in segregated airspace at the moment, that all feels quite comfortable and quite doable. And there was a question also on swarming, and I think that the logic and the principles remain the same. We've done several swarming trials, some of them RF swarming, some visual technology keeping them in the swarm. The bit for us at this point is how are you going to guarantee to keep them within your operating volume? If they do crash into each other inside there, just ensure us that that's not going to bring any harm to people in there. So very much our rationale, our principles is what is the overall wrapper around it, and if within that you want to do mad, crazy, funky stuff, but you can assure us that this is safe as the wrapper, then we're very happy to do that. And we've seen some quite big swarm elements going into there. In terms of the sort of the RF protection and the assurance elements that one of the other questions alluded to, I think that's a work in progress. But again, it's that for me is not a regulatory challenge. That's a technological challenge at this point. And I think one of the bits that we've had, that one of the sticks that we often get beaten with are sticks that belong elsewhere. That there are technological challenges, that there are commercial challenges. In the regulatory space, I think we've developed a position where we're pretty comfortable to do some pretty funky stuff, as long as you can give us those firm assurances that what you're going to do is not going to depart where you plan to do it. That's it from me, Sophie. That hopefully has answered a couple of those.
Thanks, that's really great, Jay. You've addressed quite a lot, and I can see that Pete's addressing quite a lot as well in the answers on the Q&A, which I really appreciate. We're nearly in time, and I'll just maybe finish. I'll hand over to Pete for a final observation, and because there's been a question about sort of culture, and I love culture. I'm an organisational culture guru. Clearly, the whole explosion of uncrewed air systems or drones has changed the MAA in a way. And is starting to change culture. I'm not, by the way, one of those people that thinks Ukraine is telling us that drones are the only answer in the future. I'm not suggesting that. But I suppose, Pete, your final reflection as we're running up to 11 o'clock on how we're here to talk about uncrewed air systems, how you feel that is really changing, how the MAA thinks, works, and its culture potentially.
Sophie, thank you. Thank you to you, and thank you again to the Freeman Institute for hosting us, and to all the attendees and all the fantastic questions we've got. We'll have a look at how we can get after the ones we haven't answered separately. I think I'd probably talk about three things, learn, build, and collaborate. For me at the moment, it's about learning from each other, because there's a lot of good learning that everyone is doing who's part of this uncrewed enterprise. And this is part of that, building the network. If we build the network, build those relationships, not just individually in the UK, but as I said, globally, then that learning will occur a lot faster. Because ultimately we're seeking to collaborate on a shared challenge. And as you said, Ukraine has definitely injected pace into that challenge. And this has been a really good opportunity for us to collaborate on some of those shared challenges and to see how we're dealing with it. Because ultimately we can apply these lessons, these proportionalities, as I call it, to not just the uncrewed space. This can go across a whole raft of our regulations. And the bit that I talk about for the MAA and I talk to my team about is being proportionate and not being bound by our compliance and our regulatory articles. And that is something that we take very, very seriously. Because ultimately we have to remember that we're trying to enable capability getting to the warfighter and getting to the front line and dealing with that very fast-paced changing threat. But we need to make certain we also do that in an appropriately safe manner. And that's the key bit, is getting that balance right, as I mentioned at the beginning of my pitch. So thank you again. Keen to, I say, keep the conversation going and keep collaborating. So very much appreciate it, Sophie.
Yeah, no, thank you to all three of you for joining us. I know you're really keen, you have been really keen to try and interact with people, and I'm glad that we were able to facilitate a webinar. And oh my goodness, the number of questions is massive, the number of attendees huge. So there's clearly an enormous interest in listening to what you have to say and asking you questions. So it just we need to wind up. We're just a minute or so over time. Tony, Joe, Pete, thank you so much. We'll keep the conversation going, and perhaps there'll be an opportunity to do another webinar in some time in the future, because there's clearly so much interest in this topic. Thanks so much.